Hey guys, Mrs. Lofters here with your second video lesson for Julius Caesar. Today we're going to be reading Act 3, Scenes 2 and 3. If you have your books with you, we are going to be on page 44. So quick 30-second recap. Remember in Scene 1, we saw that Julius Caesar was killed by the conspirators. Their plan was finally carried out. Casca was the first to stab him, but they all stabbed him multiple times. And now on page 44, we see in scene 2 what Brutus, Cassius, and Antony agreed upon at the end of Act 3, scene 1, which is that they're going to have a funeral for Caesar. So if you go to page 44 in your book, you'll see that scene 2 takes place in the Forum, which is really like the center of Roman government. It's a big area that has sort of like a stage or a platform where people can address the public. They can address the crowd. So you'll notice that your stage directions at the beginning of scene 2 say, "Enter Brutus and Cassius and a throng of citizens." So when the recording starts, you're going to see that there's a big crowd of citizens, and Brutus and Cassius are going to each speak to a group of them. So you'll notice that there's going to be two citizens talking, and one is going to say, "Hey, I'm going to go hear what Cassius has to say." The other one's going to say, "I'm going to hear what Brutus has to say." So just to be clear, Brutus and Cassius are more or less saying the same exact thing. It's just that one of them is talking to one part of the crowd and the other one is talking to the other part. Now, the book only shows us Brutus speaking. We don't hear Cassius speaking, but we can assume that he's saying the same thing. So we're going to start on page 44, and then I will pause the recording basically at the top of page 46, okay? So we're going to read through the bottom of page 4, all of page 45, top of page 46. And what you're going to hear is Brutus speaking to the crowd. As you're listening to Brutus speak, he speaks in a more everyday language. Remember, we talked about the difference between poetry and prose. So you're going to hear Brutus speaking in prose, the more everyday language. And he's going to explain to the crowd why it is that they needed to kill Caesar. So with your highlighter on the top of page 45, when you hear Brutus speaking, what you want to do is to look for sort of the reasons that he gives the citizens and think about his technique with persuasion. Remember we learned about ethos, pathos, and logos. So when you think about logos, that logic, what logic does he give them? When you're thinking about pathos, you're thinking about the passion, the sort of, emotion that he gives them. And when you're thinking about ethos, you're thinking about that credibility. Why can we trust Brutus? Okay, so that's what I want you guys to think about as we read this first section. So page 44, here we go. Let's begin.
Into the other street and part the numbers. Those that will hear me speak, let them stay here. Those that will follow Cassius, go with him, and public reasons shall be rendered on Caesar's death.
I will hear Brutus speak. I will hear Cassius and compare their reasons when severally we hear them render it.
Be patient till the last. Caesar. This is my answer. Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. Had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves than that Caesar were dead to live all free men? As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. There is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. Who is here so base that would be a bondman? If any, speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so rude that would not be a Roman? If any, speak, for him have I offended. Who is here so vile that will not love his country? If any, speak, for him have I offended. I pause for a reply. No, Brutus! Then none have I offended. I have done no more to Caesar than you shall do to Brutus. The question of his death is enrolled in the Capitol. His glory not extenuated wherein he was worthy, nor his offences enforced for which he suffered death. Here comes his body, mourned by Mark Antony, who, though he had no hand in his death, shall receive the benefit of his dying, a place in the commonwealth, as which of you shall not? With this I depart, that as I slew my best lover for the good of Rome, I have the same dagger for myself when it shall please my country to need my death. Live, Brutus, live! Radiant triumph, power unto his hand! The statue with his ancestors! Let him be Caesar! Caesar's better part shall be crowned in Brutus! Into his house with shouts and clamours! My countrymen!
Be silent! Brutus, speak!
Be so! Good countrymen, let me depart alone, and for my sake stay here with Antony. Do grace to Caesar's corpse, and grace his speech tending to Caesar's glories, which Mark Antony, by our permission, is allowed to make. I do entreat you, not a man depart save I alone, till Antony have spoke.
Okay, so let's pause here for a minute. So, as you can see, Brutus definitely has a way with the crowd. If we go back to where the scene first started, okay, I'm scrolling back up, we see that right here, he tells Cassius, those that will hear, or tells the crowd, right, those that will hear me speak, let him stay here. Those that will follow Cassius, go with him. So basically, the crowd, as I said, splits up. Some go with Brutus and some go with Cassius to hear why it is that they killed Caesar. And we hear him say, the second citizen, I will hear Cassius and compare their reasons when severally we hear them rendered. So basically, they're going to compare what both Brutus and Cassius say. Now, I have to direct your attention here to Brutus's speech. So in your book, this would be starting at the bottom of page 44 up to the top of page 45. First of all, he addresses the crowd as Romans, countrymen, and lovers. Remember that the term here, lovers, means friends. So he's addressing what he considers to be the Roman people, his friends, right? And he tells them basically to be silent or be quiet so that they can hear him. If we look at the reasons that he gives, he says that Brutus' love to Caesar was no less than any other man, right? So basically, his answer, this is my answer as to why he killed Caesar. This line right here is a really important line to highlight. He says, not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. That really is the main point of Brutus's argument. Okay, so if we're thinking about like almost his argument being like an essay, that would be the thesis. Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more. And then he asks them some questions. He says, had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves than that Caesar were dead to live all as free men? So he basically is trying to get the crowd to see that in his opinion, if Caesar were still alive, everybody would be a slave, but he wants them to be free men. Then he says, as Caesar loved me, again, acknowledging their friendship, I weep for him. Okay, I cry for him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him. And this line is important. There's tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. I want to talk just for a second here about the word ambitious. So we talked about this before school sort of got closed, but ambition is not necessarily a bad thing. If we think about somebody being ambitious, the word ambitious kind of means that you go after what you want, right? So if somebody is ambitious, meaning, they try really hard and they go after what they want, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The word ambitious is not a bad word. Ambitious really focuses on context. And so in this case, Brutus calling Caesar ambitious is a negative thing because he's saying, Caesar was too ambitious. That's why, remember, Caesar ran off the second member of the triumvirate. He took the power for himself. Here they're talking about the idea of ambition just being like a lust almost, or a desire for power. So that's really why the word ambitious is so negative here. And then he again continues with these questions. Who here is so base? That would be a bondman. Sort of like who here is so silly? That would be a bondman, like a prisoner. Who here is so rude? That would not be a Roman. If any speak, for him have I offended. And notice he pauses for a reply. So he waits for them to answer these questions. And the crowd, they answer him. None, Brutus, none. I mean, they're clearly on his side. So then he says, then none have I offended. Okay? And then this is where I think he gets really powerful. He says, I have done no more to Caesar than you shall do to Brutus. So his purpose here, right, is that if he ever was to act the way Caesar acted, that he would also deserve to be killed. He says here, with this I depart, so he's getting ready to leave, that as I slew my best lover for the good of Rome, I have the same dagger for myself when it shall please my country to need my death. So I killed my best lover, my best friend for the good of Rome. I have the same dagger for myself when it shall please my country to need my death. So if there's ever a point basically where Rome needs Brutus to die, he's saying, I have the same dagger. I would basically take myself out. Now we know that the crowd is on his side because they say, live, Brutus, live. Okay, so they're clearly on his side. They have clearly been influenced by his speech, and they're okay with the fact that he killed Caesar. So now as Brutus gets ready to leave, and on your book, this is the top of page 46, Brutus says, stay here with Antony, right? Let me depart alone, and for my sake, stay here with Antony. Notice he talks about what we saw in Act 2, which Mark Antony, by our permission, is allowed to make. Save, I do entreat you, not a man depart, save I alone till Antony have spoke. So basically, he gives the crowd, he says, okay, Mark Antony is allowed to talk to you. We've given him permission to do so. And nobody leave. Only I'm leaving until after Antony speaks. Now, I want to give you guys a moment to think about this, okay? Brutus and Cassius told Mark Antony that he could speak to the crowd as long as he didn't say anything bad about them. He only said good things about Caesar. Now, if you remember in Mark Antony's soliloquy at the end of scene 1 that we read last week, Antony revealed to us his plan was to basically start a civil war in Rome, and that he really did not understand what the conspirators did. He was not on their side. So Brutus is making a very interesting decision here. He's leaving. He's not going to hear Mark Antony speak. You can decide for yourself what you think of that decision, but this is what he decides to do. He decides to leave and leaves Antony alone with the crowd and with Caesar's body. So as he leaves, Antony is now going to speak to the crowd. Guys, pay really close attention to this next part, because this next speech that Antony is going to give is one of the most famous speeches in all of literature. It begins with the words, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." I don't even have to read that in my book because I've read it so many times. But when you get to that part, okay, I want you to think about how Antony now uses his techniques, his ethos, pathos, logos, to persuade the crowd. Okay, we know he wants to start a civil war. We know that he does not agree with the reasons that Brutus and Cassius gave for killing Caesar. So I'm just going to play basically bottom of page 46 through the middle of page 47 until Antony stops speaking for the first time. And I want you to pay really close attention with your highlighter. Think about the technique he's using. How does he get the crowd to see his point of view? What literary devices does he use? I'll give you a hint. You're going to see some repetition, okay? So see how he persuades the crowd and kind of manipulates them. Here we go.
Stay home! Let us hear Mark Antony! Let him go up into the public chair. We'll hear him. Noble Antony, go up!
For Brutus' sake, I am beholding to you.
What does he say of Brutus?
He says for Brutus' sake he finds himself beholding to us all.
Your Majesty speak no harm of Brutus here. This Caesar was a tyrant! Yes, we're blessed that Rome is rid of him. Please, let us hear what Antony can say.
You gentle Romans, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke,
But here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? Oh, judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me.
Methinks there is much reason in his sayings.
I consider rightly of the matter. Caesar has had great wrong. Has he, masters? I fear there will a worse come in his place. Prodigy his words. He would not take the crown, therefore it certainly was not ambition.
Crown, some will dare abide it.
Poor soul, his eyes are red as fire with weeping.
There's not a nobler man in Rome than Antony.
Romans!
Now mark him. He begins again to speak.
I don't know about you, but this always makes me laugh when the citizens start responding to Mark Antony. So let's recap for a minute. When Caesar was killed, the citizens ran around in terror. Brutus spoke to them and they were like, "Oh, Brutus, you're so honorable. Yes, Caesar was ambitious, right?" And then Mark Antony comes, and with one speech, suddenly they've changed their mind again. We've talked about the citizens in the beginning of the play sort of being like sheep or bandwagoners. They're very quick to jump and support just whoever's in charge. And here, as you can see, they definitely agree with Antony, right? I mean, look, methinks there is much reason in his sayings, right? If thou consider rightly of the matter, Caesar has had a great wrong. There's not a nobler man in Rome than Antony, okay? Oh, here, he would not take the crown, therefore 'tis certain he was not ambitious. So we can see the citizens are moved by Antony's speech. Now let's go back and look at what he says, because, I mean, what a powerful speech, right? If he was able to change everybody's mind. So he begins by saying, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." So just like Brutus kind of addressed the crowd, remember Brutus said to them, "Romans, countrymen, and lovers." He says, "Friends, Romans, countrymen." So their speeches start off in the exact same way, which I think is important because both men obviously think that they're in the right and think that they're doing what is best. So Mark Antony starts with, "I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him." Okay, so that's important because that's what he's supposedly there to do, to have a funeral and bury Caesar's body, not to do anything else. This line is important. You guys should be annotating all over this speech because this is one of the most important speeches in the whole play. He says, "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar." To translate that for you, it basically means that when men do bad things, it lives on after them, but people don't remember the good things that they do. It's interred or buried with their bones. If you think about it, it's kind of true, right? I mean, how many people have you known in your life where it's like, okay, I know them, everything's great, it's great. And then they do one bad thing and that's it. As a teacher, I've certainly had this happen before where, the whole year everything's been good with a student and then one weird thing happens and suddenly, bam, they don't like me. And maybe you've had that same situation happen with a teacher or with a friend or somebody. So think about it in that way. Mark Antony is basically saying, like, of course you're only going to remember the bad things. The good stuff usually dies with people. He continues, "The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If so, it were a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it." So he's basically saying here, the Brutus told you Caesar was ambitious, and if he was, it was a grievous, basically in this case, a deadly fault. Like, he died for it. He answered it grievously, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Okay, here under the leave of Brutus and the rest. Now here he starts repeating, "For Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men." Pay attention to the way he uses this word honorable, because when he first mentions it, it's not super clear, but he's using it sarcastically. And hopefully you heard that as the speech went on, okay? Brutus and all the rest of the men claim to be doing this, killing Caesar for the good of Rome, for their honor. Mark Antony is using that word specifically to point out that in his view, they are not honorable. He is being sarcastic, okay? And he says that here, he continues, right? When he's talking about Caesar, he says, he was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. So that's that sarcasm that you hear Mark Antony using. Now, he gives us some examples that we have to pay attention to. He's talking about Caesar here, and he says, Caesar hath brought many captives home to Rome, so he had many prisoners, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. So when they ransomed people that they captured, right, it made them money. It filled the general coffers. He says, did this in Caesar seem ambitious? So was this ambitious? Was this bad? Then he says, when the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. So when the poor people were crying, Caesar cried too. He's kind of making the point, well, then how is he so ambitious, right? But here comes the sarcasm. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. Then he brings up the scenario that we all know. Remember, during the Feast of Lupercal in Act 1, he tried to give Caesar a crown. You all did see that on the Lupercal, I three times presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? So he's bringing up the fact that Caesar refused the crown. He's like, hey, if he refused the crown, how can he be so ambitious, right? Here he goes with the sarcasm. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man. Now here's where Antony tries to keep his promise, where he says, I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. Okay? And here he kind of calls them out. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn with him? So you all loved Caesar, right? So you need to mourn for him. You need to honor his death and have this funeral. And then we can see he gets emotional, or pretends to, whichever. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it comes back to me. So now Mark Antony takes a pause, and this pause is very strategic because, as we can see, the citizens, they agree that, oh my gosh, he's right. And now he's going to speak again, okay? So if you're following along in your book, he's going to start speaking now at the bottom of page 47, okay? But yesterday, the word of Caesar might have stood against the world. So he's going to continue in his speech right now. He's got the crowd already on his side, and he's going to mention to them the idea of Caesar's will. Just in case you don't know, a will is what somebody leaves, where they tell people basically what they want to happen when they die. So if I had a will right now, I might say, okay, in my will, I would like to leave my photography equipment to so-and-so, and I'd like to leave my car to so-and-so. And so a will is sort of where somebody details what they want to happen when they die. So in this next part of the speech, he's going to mention that Caesar has a will to the crowd. And I want you to pay attention to how he sort of uses the will to manipulate the crowd and to get them thinking about Caesar and sort of what Caesar might have wanted for them. Okay, here we go.
But yesterday, the word of Caesar might have stood against the world. Now lies he there, and none so poor to do him reverence. Oh, masters! If I were disposed to stir your hearts and minds to mutiny and rage, I should do Brutus wrong and Cassius wrong, who you all know are honorable men. I will not do them wrong. I rather choose to wrong the dead, to wrong myself and you, than I will wrong such honorable men. But here's a parchment with the seal of Caesar. I found it in his closet. 'Tis his will. Let but the commons hear this testament, which, pardon me, I do not mean to read. And they would go and kiss dead Caesar's wounds, and dip their napkins in his sacred blood. Yea, beg a hair of him for memory, and dying, mention it within their wills, bequeathing it as a rich legacy unto their issue.
We'll hear the will.
Have patience, gentle friends. I must not read it. It is not meet you know how Caesar loved you. You are not wood. You are not stones, but men. And being men, hearing the will of Caesar, it will inflame you. It will make you mad. 'Tis good you know not that you are his heirs. For if you should, oh, what would come of it?
Read the will!
We'll hear it, Antony!
You should read us the will. Caesar's will.
Will you be patient? Will you stay a while? I have overshot myself to tell you of it. I fear I wrong the honorable men whose daggers have stabbed Caesar. I do fear it.
They were traitors.
You will compel me then to read the will? Then make a ring about the corpse of Caesar, and let me show you him that made the will. Shall I descend, and will you give me leave?
Okay, I'm going to pause here while they're shouting. So, did you notice how Antony uses the will of Caesar to manipulate the crowd? So, if we go back to the beginning of where Antony started speaking, and for you guys, that is at the bottom of page 47, right? This where he begins, but yesterday the word of Caesar, right? He says that he is right here. He says, O masters, if I was disposed to stir your hearts and minds to mutiny and rage, so if I wanted to have you guys mutiny and rage, right, I would do Brutus wrong. I should do Brutus wrong and Cassius wrong, who you all know are honorable men. So he's basically like, I can't say this because, I would stir your heart and mind to mutiny, and I don't want to wrong Cassius and Brutus. Again, we see that technique there, right? He says, I will not do them wrong. I rather choose to wrong the dead, meaning Caesar, to wrong myself and you, the people of Rome, than I will to wrong such honorable men. So again, we see him here making that same sarcastic remark. Then he says, here is a parchment with the seal of Caesar. I found it in his closet. It is his will, okay? And look what he says in the will. He says that he, dying it and mention it within their wills, bequeathing it as a rich legacy. So the people want to hear the will. We will hear the will. And then here's where he hones in. He says, I must not read it. It is not meet you know how Caesar loved you. So he's teasing the crowd here, being like, I can't read it. You can't know how much Caesar loved you. Why? Because it will inflame you. It will make you mad. It's good you know not that you are his heirs. His heirs meaning the people he's left things to in his will. So he's teasing this crowd, okay? And we know he's teasing them because he says, will you be patient? Will you stay a while? He's going to keep talking. He says, I fear I wrong the honorable men whose daggers have stabbed Caesar. I do fear it. And notice the citizens are now completely on his side. They were traitors, honorable men, okay? They were villains, murderers. Read the will. So now Mark Antony, he's not going to read the will yet. He's going to sort of use his strategy a little bit more, right? He says, You will compel me then to read the will, then make a ring about the corpse of Caesar, and let me show you him that made the will. Shall I descend? So to imagine this for a moment, he's been speaking to the crowd, sort of up on like a pulpit, like a stage, if you will, and he's speaking to the people down below. Caesar's body is lying below him there. So now he's going to descend or come down and actually show them Caesar's body. So we left off at the bottom of page 48. And when I put the recording back on, the crowd's going to shout a little bit. And then you notice Mark Antony is going to speak here, top of page 49. And he's going to say, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. So in this part, Mark Antony is literally walking down from the stage, down from the pulpit into the main area where Caesar's body is. And he's literally going to show the people Caesar's body. He's going to show them Caesar's wounds. And I want you to think about the impact this would have on the crowd, right? I mean, it's one thing to hear about somebody dying in sort of the abstract, but then it's quite another for you to be shown the person's body. And especially when this body was stabbed so many times, it's 33 times his body was stabbed. It's really a lot to take on. So in this next part of the speech, you're going to see Antony show them his Caesar's body and speak about all the wounds that Caesar has.
Stand from the hearse. Stand from the body.
For Antony, most noble Antony.
Nay, press not so upon me. Stand far off. If you have tears, prepare to shed them now. You all do know this mantle. I remember the first time ever Caesar put it on. 'Twas on a summer's evening in his tent. That day he overcame the Nervii. Look, in this place ran Cassius' dagger through. See what a rent the envious Casca made. Through this the well-beloved Brutus stabbed, and, as he plucked his cursed steel away, mark how the blood of Caesar followed it, as rushing out of doors to be resolved if Brutus so unkindly knocked or no. For Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. Judge, O you gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all, for when the noble Caesar saw him stab, ingratitude more strong than traitors' arms quite vanquished him. Then burst his mighty heart, and in his mantle muffling up his face, even at the base of Pompey's statue, which all the while ran blood, great Caesar fell. Oh, what a fall was there, my countrymen! Then I, and you, and all of us fell down, whilst bloody treason flourished over us. Oh, now you weep, and I perceive you feel the dint of pity. These are gracious drops. Kind souls, what weep you when you but behold our Caesar's vesture wounded? Look you here. Here is himself, marred as you see with traitors.
Piteous spectacle. Oh, noble Caesar.
A woeful day. Traitors. Villains.
Oh, most bloody sight.
We will be revenged. Revenge. Revenge.
All right, so the crowd is getting rowdy here. All right, let's look at how he described Caesar's body, right? I mean, first of all, he begins this part of the speech with, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. So he's literally warning the crowd that he's about to do something very sad and they might cry, right? And he's talking about the mantle Caesar is wearing. A mantle would be kind of like that, almost like a robe that he would be wearing. And so that's what he's talking about. Now, notice how he points out each one of Caesar's wounds, and he talks about the person who might have made it. Now, obviously, he doesn't know exactly who made which wound, but it's a tactic, right? He says, "Look, in this place ran Cassius's dagger through. See what a rent the envious Casca made." I mean, let's look at that. He names Cassius and puts a dagger wound to him, and then names Cassius. Casca calls him envious and say that he made this stab wound, right? Through this, the well-beloved Brutus stabbed, okay? Well-beloved Brutus stabbed. I mean, look at these adjectives he's using to describe each person. Okay, and as he plucked his cursed steel away, so as he pulled his sword out, mark how did the blood of Caesar follow it. Okay, so Caesar was bleeding; it was following Brutus's stab wound, and then he says something very important, right? He says, if for Brutus, make sure you highlight this one. For Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. Judge, O you gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all. So honing in on Brutus here, okay? Brutus was Caesar's angel. They were friends. Caesar loved him, okay? And this was the most unkindest cut because Brutus was close to Caesar, so him stabbing him was the most unkind. And then he says, for when the noble Caesar saw him stab, ingratitude more strong than traitor's arms, quite vanquished him and then burst his mighty heart. Remember when we were talking about the line, et tu Brute, so fall Caesar? That was, we talked about the double meaning in that line and how it was about, yes, Caesar being stabbed by Brutus, but also about Caesar's heart literally breaking because Brutus stabbed him. This is what Antony is talking about here, right? Talking about Caesar's heart bursting when Brutus stabbed him. So yes, physically he was stabbed, but also emotionally in his heart burst. And then he says here, basically, he continues pointing out, weep you when you behold our Caesar vesture wounded. So he's just basically pointing out Caesar's wound, having them look at them. And then you say, here is Caesar marred with traitors. He's been stabbed by these traitors. If we look at the citizens' reactions, now they're ready to riot, right? Traitors, villains, we will be revenged. They say revenge, seek, fire, burn, kill, slay. This is exactly what Mark Antony said he was going to do. He said he was going to start a civil war. He said, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Here we go. Now, the crowd is already ready to go, but Antony is not done. He's almost done, okay? So here you go. On the top of page 50, okay, Antony is going to speak to the crowd one more time, and he's going to bring their attention back to the will. The will, actually, before he talks about the will, the first thing he's going to do is talk about he's going to compare himself to Brutus. So in this next part that begins, good friends, sweet friends, let me not stir you up, he's going to talk about comparing himself to Brutus and talking about, what he thinks the crowd might want to do. And then he is going to talk to the crowd about the will. So that'll continue starting on page 50 with good friends, sweet friends, and then we'll end right before the citizens leave with Caesar's body. So in the middle of page 51, he's going to talk again, remember, comparing himself to Brutus, talking about what power he has, and then he's going to talk to the citizens about Caesar's will. Okay, here we go.
Stay, countrymen! Good friends, sweet friends, let me not stir you up to such a sudden flood of mutiny. They that have done this deed are honorable. What private griefs they have, alas, I know not that made them do it. They are wise, and honourable, and will, no doubt, with reasons answer you. I come not, friends, to steal away your hearts. I am no orator as Brutus is, but as you know me all, a plain, blunt man that love my friend. And that they know full well that gave me public leave to speak of him, for I have neither writ, nor words, nor worth, action, nor utterance, nor the power of speech to stir men's blood. I only speak right on. I tell you that which you yourselves do know. Show you sweet Caesar's wounds. Poor, poor, dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus, and Brutus Antony, there were an Antony would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny.
He'll burn the house of Brutus!
Seek the conspiracy! Yet hear me, countrymen! Yet hear me speak!
Most noble Antony!
Why, friends, you go to do you know not what? Wherein hath Caesar thus deserved your loves? Alas, you know not. I must tell you then, you have forgot the will I told you of. Here is the will, and under Caesar's seal, to every Roman citizen he gives, to every several man, 75 drachmas.
Most noble Caesar, we'll revenge his death! Royal Caesar!
Hear me with patience. Moreover, he hath left you all his walks, his private arbours and new planted orchards on this side Tiber. He hath left them you and to your heirs forever. Common pleasures to walk abroad and recreate yourselves. Here was a Caesar. When comes such another?
Knock down benches! Knock down forms! Windows! Anything!
Now let it work. Mischief thou art afoot. Take thou what course thou wilt.
Okay, so let's pause here. So as we can see, the citizens have now taken Caesar's body. They're running through the streets. They say they're going to get fire. I mean, they're all in a tizzy. Let's go back really quick and talk about what he says here. So when he's comparing himself to sort of Brutus and talking about this, he says, "Good friends, let me not stir you up to such a sudden flood of mutiny." We know that's exactly what he wants. He wants to stir the people up. But again, he's using almost like this reverse psychology to kind of get the people, they're not that smart to do what he wants them to do. He says that he knows what private griefs the conspirators have, that he doesn't know what private griefs they have, alas, I know not. He doesn't know what made them do it, but they are wise and honorable and will no doubt with reasons answer you. Okay, so he is saying here, I really don't know why these conspirators did what they did, but they're wise and honorable. I'm sure they'll tell you. And then, in the most ironic statement ever, he says, I am no orator as Brutus is, but as you know me, a plain, blunt man. Now, an orator means somebody who gives speeches well. So he's basically like, I'm not a good speaker like Brutus. I'm just a plain, blunt man. I say exactly what I mean. That's pretty much the exact opposite of what Antony is. He is a very good speaker, and he is not a plain, blunt man. He is using lots of persuasive technique to get the people on his side. So this is just more of what he's doing, okay? And he says, for I have neither wit, meaning smarts, nor words, nor worth, action, nor utterance, nor the power of speech to stir men's blood. Okay, so basically he's saying, I don't have the smarts or the words or the money or the power of speaking to be able to get men to do things. I tell you which you yourselves do know. And then he goes back to this comparison he made. He did this, by the way, in Act 3, Scene 1, where he compares Caesar's wounds to mouths, okay? He talks about Caesar's wounds being these poor, dumb mouths. And he says that he bids Caesar's wounds to speak for him, okay? He says, but were I Brutus and Brutus Antony, there were an Antony who would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar, so that Caesar's wounds are now speaking to take the people of Rome to rise and mutiny. So this is where he sort of makes that comparison between him and Brutus. But notice, I mean, this isn't accurate. He's totally just using this technique. All right, so the people are ready to mutiny. And then he says here, I must tell you, you have forgot the will I told you of. This is at the bottom of page 50. Okay, and they're like, oh yeah, we forgot the will. So the first thing, he says that Caesar gave every Roman citizen 75 drachmas. If you look at your footnote, a drachma is an ancient Greek silver coin. So basically he left to every citizen 75 drachmas. So money, of course they're going to be happy with that. Then what else did he do? It says he left you all his walks, okay, his private arbors and new planted orchards on this side Tiber. So basically he's describing like gardens and walking paths and like public spaces, okay? And he says he has left them to you and your heirs forever, common pleasures to walk abroad and recreate yourself. So he's left them all of his private gardens and spaces to be public places where people can now go and walk around and recreate or have fun. So basically, he's telling the people that in Caesar's will, he left things to them. He left them money and he left them land. Now, the question always is, well, where did Mark Antony get Caesar's will? Did he go all the way back to his house? I mean, he says he found it in Caesar's closet. Did he go get it? When did he have time? Who knows? Who knows if this is even really Caesar's will? I mean, Mark Antony says it is, but we don't know that it is. But Mark Antony uses this will to really let the people know, like, hey, Caesar loved you. Look, he left you money and he left you land. So aren't you going to go and fight for him? That's why he says, here was a Caesar, meaning a king. When comes such another? So now we see the citizens are ready to go fight. They fetch fire, whatever, and they take Caesar's body and they start basically marching through the streets with it. So Antony's last words here before we paused are, now let it work. Mischief, thou art afoot. So mischief is started. Take what course thou wilt. So basically Antony's goal here, remember, is to start a civil war, to start this violence. He's not going to go in and sort of dictate what course the violence is going to take. He's just like, hey, take what course, like I have set you free. Now let's see what's going to happen. Okay, so the last part of this scene, now we see Octavius's servant. Remember, we met him back at the end of scene 1. Octavius, Caesar's son, his servant is here to tell him where Octavius is. Also pay attention to what the servant says about Brutus and Cassius.
How now, fellow?
Sir, Octavius has already come to Rome.
Where is he?
He and Lepidus are at Caesar's house.
And thither will I straight to visit him. He comes upon a wish. Fortune is merry, and in this mood will give us anything.
I heard him say Brutus and Cassius are rid like madmen through the gates of Rome.
Belike they had some notice of the people, how I had moved them. Bring me to Octavius.
Okay, so that's the end of this scene. Notice Octavius is at Caesar's house with another guy named Lepidus. We'll meet him more later on in the play. And notice that the servant says, I heard him say Brutus and Cassius are rid like madmen through the gates of Rome. So basically, the people have now been rioting through the streets of Rome, and Brutus and Cassius, they ran away. They ran out of the gates of Rome. They are now fearing for their lives because the people are mutinying and running around, burning things. It's all kinds of crazy. Now, we're going to roll straight into scene 3 because look on your books on page 52. It's only one page and it doesn't make sense to do a whole video about it. So we're just going to roll into scene 3. So the people are running through the streets of Rome. They're doing all kinds of crazy shenanigans. And as you can see, scene 3 is in a street in Rome, and a man enters named Cinna the poet. You may remember the name Cinna because Cinna is one of the men who was a conspirator. He's one of the men that stabbed Caesar. However, the Cinna on this street in this scene is not the same Cinna. Same name, different man, okay? Pay attention to how the citizens treat him. So these are the citizens who are now out mutinying, going through the streets, just causing a ruckus. Pay attention to how they treat this Cinna and what they do to him. Here we go.
I dreamt tonight that I did feast with Caesar, and things unluckily charge my fantasy. I have no will to wander forth of doors, yet something leads me forth.
What is your name?
Whither are you going?
Where do you dwell? Are you a married man or a bachelor? Answer every man directly. Aye, and briefly. Aye, and wisely. Aye, and truly you were best.
What is my name? Whither am I going? Where do I dwell? Am I a married man or a bachelor? Then to answer every man directly and briefly, wisely and truly, wisely I say, I am a bachelor.
That's as much as to say they are fools that marry. You'll bear me a bang for that, I fear. Proceed directly.
Directly, I am going to Caesar's funeral.
As a friend or an enemy?
As a friend.
That matter is answered directly. For your dwelling, briefly.
Briefly, I dwell by the Capitol.
Your name, sir, truly.
Truly, my name is Cinna.
Tear him to pieces. He's a conspirator.
I am Cinna the poet. I am Cinna the poet.
Tear him for his bad verses. Tear him for his bad verses.
I am not Cinna the conspirator.
It is no matter. His name's Cinna. Pluck put his name out of his heart and turn him going.
Tear him.
Tear him. Come, Brands. Oh, fire, Brands.
Wow, guys. I mean, I hope you understand the impact of that, but they killed this guy just because his name was Cinna. I mean, they acknowledge that he's not the same Cinna, right? He says to them, I am Cinna the poet. I am Cinna the poet. And so they respond, well, tear him for his bad verses. Tear him for his bad verses. I am not Cinna the conspirator. It is no matter. His name, Cinna, pluck but his name out of his heart and turn him going. And then they beat him up and basically kill him. So guys, that is how crazy what has happened with Mark Antony stirring up the citizens has made everybody. It's made everyone so crazy that they're willing to basically take this poor man on the street who has nothing to do with anything. He's literally just, when the scene opens, he's sitting there, reciting his little poem and not bothering anybody. But just because they see him there and they ask him questions and they find out that his name is Cinna, they're willing to kill him. And there were some, puns here where he says, wisely, I'm a bachelor. There's much as to say that fools are that marry. I don't really care that you know all of those puns. If you get them, great. If you don't, it's okay. What I really want you to understand here is that the citizens are so just crazy right now that they're willing to kill this poor man, even though he has absolutely nothing to do with the conspiracy. He just happens to have the same name as a conspirator. All right, that is the end of Act 3. So now that you've read all of Act 3, there is an assignment called... it's a comparison of Brutus versus Mark Antony and the speeches that they gave. Hopefully, if you were following along and taking notes in your book, now you can go do that assignment, and that assignment will make perfect sense. If you get confused with that assignment or you need help, as always, remember I'm available for office hours every single day between 10 and 11 a.m. and 2 to 3 p.m. To go to my office hours, all you have to do is click the link or go to meets.google.com, enter my name, Lofters, as the nickname, and then it'll pop up. You can chat with me about any questions you have, or if you want me to explain that assignment to you, I'm happy to do it. As long as you don't need me, though, you're welcome to go ahead and get that assignment done all on your own. And this will be due on Monday. So hopefully you enjoy Act 3, Scene 2 and 3. It's my favorite part of the play, action-packed. And we finally got to see Mark Antony speak, and he has now become a main character in this play. I know people are always confused when Caesar dies less than halfway through the play, and they're like, but wait a minute, what is the rest of the play going to be about? Well, as you'll see soon, Acts 4 and 5 are basically now there's going to be a fallout and a war a civil war between Mark Antony, Octavius, and the people on their side versus Brutus and Cassius and the people on their side. So next week, when we read Acts 4 and 5, you'll get to see all of that happen. Again, guys, if you have any questions, I'm here for you every day between 10 and 11 and 2 and 3. Bye.